Okay, so we're going to go over designing and planning courses. We'd already talked about how to be an effective teacher in the last lecture. So we're going to cover some of the things to be thinking about as you're doing some course planning. So I've provided to you, there's a link here to the APA guidelines for the undergraduate psychology major coming from the APA. Now, this is version 2.0. It was released in August 2013, just to kind of give you an idea of how old it is. There are definitely considerations for making changes to this. I'll cover this in just a minute. But these are really, really great guidelines to try to have some standardization when it comes to looking at the undergraduate psychology major. We'll get into more detail there, but you can actually get the full PDF from that link that I have here. I also have the link in the notes in the PowerPoint slides. And then another really, really wonderful resource is the Center for Teaching Excellence, the CTE that USC has. And so I've got a link here, but there are multiple links, and this is kind of like just the sort of main page for course design. There's a bunch of ways that you can go from here in terms of directions. So, this can kind of like lead you down almost a rabbit hole if you are interested in a particular modality. So online teaching, distributed learning, whatever it might be. One other thing that I kind of want to bring out here with the Centers of Teaching Excellence is that they have instructional designers. And so the instructional designer's job is to help you design the course, whether it's aesthetically, trying to understand how to set things up, trying to make it, better for accessibility, whatever it might be. And so we actually do have instructional designers who are, part of our USC system, and they're really, really helpful to meet with. You can do a consultation with them. They can help you design the course, especially if you're not very well versed in the learning management system. And our learning management system is Blackboard. We also have UltraView Blackboard. So if you want to meet with somebody, that's actually really, really great resource. You can meet with them multiple times to help design your course. So I will be kind of referring to this APA resource and the CTE source kind of throughout this lecture. And the idea is that there's a set of expectations for teaching psychology to undergraduates, and there's nice tables all throughout it that explain, these are the things that we would expect a psychology major who graduates to, these are the skills that we would expect, and this is the information that we would expect that they come out of this, out of a major. There is a draft 3.0, and you can actually find this online, and it's labeled as a draft. And I think the intention is to hopefully at least every 10 years renew the APA guidelines. There have been a lot of changes over the last 10 years that I think will apply to some of these expectations that we have as psych majors. So I don't know if they're, what the anticipated release date is, but I would be looking for that probably around August 2023. And so, some things to consider. So, only 20 to 24% of our majors are going to complete graduate study in psychology. How do you teach to people who are not, thinking of going into graduate school and continuing their education in psychology? So what that means is that, maybe we need to have a better connection between employer needs and like a liberal arts education, since that tends to be very vague. Are we setting these students up for a good scenario if we say, okay, here's what we expect you to learn in the major, and then if they never apply that later on, that disconnect needs to be corrected. And then we tend to serve as covert career counselors, right? We are guiding this coursework, their learning experiences, learning outcomes, and our students may have a wide variety of directions in terms of where they want to go for their career. Many times it has something to do with psychology, but it may not be as obvious. And so, thinking about our target audience as we're designing our course, are we teaching to just majors? Are we teaching a higher level class? Are we teaching to freshmen or first year students who might not necessarily see themselves going into a traditional psychology career? So things just to kind of think about, and we'll talk about audience and things about related to that later. So 5 major guidelines that the APA kind of goes over in their guidelines 2.0. And so, again, there's some really great tables on that PDF. I really want you to check that out because it goes through each one of these in terms of expectations. So like knowledge base in psychology. What kinds of things do we expect students to be able to know? Like, can they describe key concepts and principles, overarching themes? Do they understand or have a working knowledge of content domains in psychology? Can they describe applications of psychology? And then what skills do their future employers want them to know and be able to do, coming from having having a resume that says psychology major and psychology degree? What do those employers want to see our our graduates possess? What kind of skills should they possess? The second goal, this scientific inquiry and critical thinking, we want students, in terms of us, ourselves, our department, but also the APA in general, they want students who are demonstrating that they understand psychology information literacy. We want our students to be literate in terms of being able to read papers and articles and understand basic concepts, to be able to use scientific reasoning to interpret psychological phenomenon and say, oh, it's just magic. No, what is the science behind that? Is it a pseudoscience? Understand and be able to think critically, be able to problem solve. Even very basic psychological research, our students should be able to interpret that, should be able to design experiments and understand the value of experimental design, even at the very basic level. Understand cause and effect claims. Right? The third one, this one's difficult. Ethical and social responsibility in a diverse world, being able to apply ethical standards, being able to evaluate psychological science and practice, understanding how to build interpersonal relationships and understand behavior. Understand values that build community at all levels, local, national, global. How can psychology promote civil, social, and global outcomes that benefit others? We talk about the bystander effect and how that impacts how people decide to help or not, and understanding that even really basic behavioral explanations can impact those around us. How does psychology benefit the globe? Or, how does it benefit the community at each sort of level of analysis? Communication, and this one tends to be frustrating for some because a lot of faculty may not want to have ways for students to practice communication, but this is vital to students coming out of a psychology major having these skills. So effective writing, effective presenting, being able to communicate with their professor, with their peers, with other people, understanding that there's cultural bias, that values and other biases can breed misunderstanding in communication, understanding effective interactions with people with lots of diverse backgrounds, right? So being able to understand stereotypes and how that works in the world and how it dictates how we behave across each other and within different groups. The final one, this is professional development. And this one can be a little tricky because, again, we can't prepare for every single student that we come out in terms of we know exactly where everybody's going and where their career is going to lead them. But being able to apply the content that they're learning to career goals, being able to hone their skills, and if you give them a project, for example, helping them build the project management skills. For example, I have a project in one of my classes that has a planning sheet where they actually have to write in on a schedule up to the due date how often they're going to work on this and what they're going to work on to build those skills. Enhancing teamwork. A lot of people don't like group projects, but sometimes if you do, and we talked about the jigsaw approach before, if you do a project where everybody's contributing a piece, but then their full grade isn't, dependent necessarily on everybody's work, can still facilitate those teamwork skills. And so, these are the kinds of things that we want to think about. How are we going to help our students gain these skills? And sometimes it's very obvious in your class, and sometimes it isn't as obvious. There is a paper that I have you guys as part of your reading list. It's the Nevin and McClellan 2013 paper, using action verbs as learning outcomes. So this is applying Bloom's taxonomy to particular objectives in an introductory to psychology course. And so this is really helpful to see these kind of action words, remember, understand, apply, how are we getting students to what kind of assessment, like what is the goal, and then how are we going to assess that they've learned that goal? And we need some action words and verbs to demonstrate how they are learning and what they are learning and what they're keeping. And so, at the very top of this pyramid is that, producing original work. And so these are some really, really wonderful action words that you can put on your learning objective and outcomes to say, okay, I want you to, construct this, develop this, formulate this. And, the bottom of this pyramid, remember, this is just very basic sort of memorization, rote memorization. Be able to understand the meaning of this word, to define this word. And of course, as you move up the pyramid, we have an increased understanding and ability to take the information and actually do something with it, all the way up to creating. So this is a really, really great model to use when you're developing your learning objectives. Start with your goal and say, where do I want to go from there? And we're going to talk a little bit more about that here in just a few minutes, but just kind of keeping this in mind and using these action words really helpful to put on your learning objectives. There's going to be some of each of this. There's going to be some just learning the words and then, learning what these terms mean. But you really want to start getting up higher into this taxonomy where you get students to actually be able to take something from your course and demonstrate that they've actually been able to apply those concepts. We're going to take a quick sidetrack to accessibility. This is something that you really need to consider. And your course is becoming more and more talked about. There's a couple of nice CTE resources here that I've got. When you have your course accessible to more people, it tends to not just help those people, right? So if you say, okay, well, one really great example that we try to do is this one right here. So if you're teaching an online class and you are, providing a video, it's really good to have a transcript along with that video. And so if you post the video and a student who is not hard of hearing, no issues with, no reason necessarily to need accommodation for a transcript, but they can see the transcript on the bottom, but they're not able to, or they're not in a particular place where they can actually listen to the lecture. So they might need to read those subtitles because they don't have headphones and they're, riding on the bus to school, or they're in a dorm room that's really loud and they can't listen and they can't hear it, but they can read it. So it helps students that may not need that accommodation, but it's something that's really helpful to make your information more accessible. So, anytime you're thinking about designing a course, you do want to try your best to make it accessible to lots of different diverse people. So one thing to consider, and there's some really great examples of on these CTE sites of how to make sure that this actually works. So when you post things to Blackboard, some people might be using screen reading software. They might have a disability where they can't read the font, or